Good evening. Woo! Can you hear me? Yes. Okay, great. So welcome to the Green Music Center and to this evening of dance and discussion dedicated to the practice of veiling. Before I introduce this evening's speaker, I would like to thank my colleague, Christine Brunem, and her Truth Larger Purpose Productions and performers for their prelude performance, which we hope has given you much food for thought before this evening's lecture. We are very grateful for the support of many entities, both on campus and off, without which this evening would not have been possible. I would like to thank the School of Arts and Humanities and the Sonoma State Hub, our Center for Diversity, Creativity, and Vitality, for making it possible for us to be in Schroeder Hall this evening. I would also like to thank Phi Beta Delta, the Honor Society for International Scholars on campus, the Department of Political Science, and the Center for Ethics, Law, and Society, as well as my own department, Modern Languages and Literatures, our administrative assistant, Kate Sims, and our very generous donor, Daphne Smith, whose contributions to the department have made many wonderful events like this possible. And so, I'm delighted to introduce to you this evening my very dear friend, Dr. Sahar Amer, Professor of Arabic Language and Cultures at the University of Sydney in Australia. Dr. Amer's work focuses on the relationship between Arabs and the West, and her most recent book has lent its title to this talk, which is called What is Veiling? Her book has inspired much interest and conversation around the world and has already been translated into Arabic. We hope you also will be inspired to participate in a discussion immediately following the talk this evening. And so without further ado, please join me in welcoming Dr. Amer.
Hi, everybody. Can you hear me? Not quite. Not very well? Okay. Can you hear me better? Yes. Okay. I'll try to make this now. Well, thank you all for being here tonight. It's really a pleasure to be at Sonoma State and to have magnificent weather that you enjoy all year round. And I'd like to thank very much Suzanne Tuchisky, who is my friend for the last 27 years, for inviting me to speak here today, and of course for all the organizations who have made this visit possible. And I'm really grateful to the performance that has preceded this talk, which was absolutely beautiful and touching and moving, and I think that is a fantastic prelude to my talk today. So today I'm going to be speaking about what is veiling. And I would like to focus about aspects of Muslim women veiling practices that are little known and oftentimes neglected by Muslims and non-Muslims alike. While many tend to attribute Muslim women veiling primarily to religious or political reasons, Muslim women veil because Islam specifically mandates it, or Muslim women veil because they're required to do so by a conservative government. We think of Iran, Saudi Arabia, or Afghanistan. Religion and politics are far from being the be-all, end-all of discussions about Muslim women and veiling. In fact, neither religion nor politics alone can help us understand the multiple, at times conflicting reasons why some Muslim women veil. Rather, veiling can best be understood when contextualized within wider cultural, geographic, feminist, economic, and artistic discourses, and also when taking into account its practice in both Muslim majority and Muslim minority societies. My research has indeed revealed that only a multidisciplinary and intersectional approach to veiling can help us understand Muslim women's veiling practices and truly uphold their human and civil rights to choose what to wear. Examining veiling from a multidisciplinary and historical perspective allows us to avoid binary oppositions. Veiling as oppression or veiling as liberation, condemnation or celebration, feminism and gender equality or subordination and coercion. Such binarism are unhelpful because they pit Euro-American women's liberation against Muslim women's submission, Euro-American democracies against Muslim authoritarian regimes, civilizational advances against backwardness and religious dogma, secularism against fanaticism, East versus West. These binarisms are also counterproductive because they fuel biased media and public debates, such as the recent controversy surrounding Michelle Obama's decision not to wear a headscarf when she accompanied her husband to pay respects to the late King Abdullah in January 2015, whereas she had covered her hair when she went to Malaysia and Indonesia in 2010-2011. Or the lawsuit against Abercrombie and Fitch for firing a veiled Muslim woman in 2013, or Jeep's 2015 Super Bowl commercial. Such prejudice and the media exploitation of it can bear tragic consequences, such as with the brutal murder of the UNC and NC State students on this past February, where 2 of the women killed wore headscarves. Such incidents confirm the recent statistics by the 2014 Pew Research Center revealing that worldwide, religious hostilities against veiled Muslim women is at a 6-year high. They also confirm the 2013 Pew Research findings that 45% of Muslim Americans face discrimination, more than any other group examined. And they corroborate the first study on Islamophobia published in France in 2012, which revealed that 84.73% of all Islamophobic incidents in France are made against women who veil. It is precisely in order to avoid such damaging binarisms that I adopted a pluridisciplinary methodology in my latest book, What is Veiling?, which, as you see, also has been translated into Arabic, and it has different cover images depending on the press which published it. In the US, the UNC Press is the one with the red veil. The middle one is Edinburgh University Press, and that's the book that is distributed in the Pacific and in Australia. And then the Egyptian cover is also different. So maybe I wrote 3 books now. This is great. My goal in my book was to encourage thus a deeper reflection about the heterogeneity of Muslim cultures and practices, to amplify the voices of Muslim women themselves so that we may begin to understand the reasons why an increasing number of Muslim women wear the veil today. It is also with these goals in mind that I co-developed a pedagogical website entitled Reorienting the Veil, to teach about Muslim women and veiling practices from a global and interdisciplinary perspective. This website is entitled Reorienting the Veil because our goal was to reorient popular and public views and understandings of veiling and attune our hearing to Muslim women's own voices and reasons for adopting the veil. The Veil website, if you look at it, is organized in such a way as to offer users multiple points of entry into the topic and deliberately avoids privileging one discourse or one perspective over another. By reorienting the veil, we offer what we hope is both a corrective and an intersectional reading of veiling to the one that has emerged since the Orientalist period and that still today too often predetermines Western views of the Muslim veil. In my talk today, rather than focus on religion and politics that are oftentimes the only themes that are readily discussed when the topic of veiling is brought up, I would like to focus instead an overview on 5 lesser-known aspects of veiling that I believe merit discussion and contribute to the construction of a more balanced understanding of veiling practices. First, I will draw attention to a growing new area of scholarship that focuses on Muslim women's interest in fashion and their increased adoption of fashionable attires. Since the 1990s, a whole new industry has developed, first in Turkey, soon thereafter in Indonesia, Iran, North Africa, and around the globe, catering to Muslim women's appetite for vibrant colors, detailed embroidery, multicolored pins, and shining stones to decorate the fabrics of overcoats, abayas, jackets, and headscarves. And the slides that I'm going to be showing here are coming from a recent exhibit by British-Iranian visual artist Sarah Shamsbari entitled The Veil Series, which was recently at the London's Royal Festival Hall. Muslim women have become savvy about the perfect color coordination between clothes, headscarves, makeup, and accessories, including handbags and shoes. And France especially, recognizing the privileged space that it occupies in the imaginary of many Middle Eastern women, has become a business leader in catering to affluent Muslim women. And here we have Yves Saint Laurent luxury scarf. Savvy French luxury French designers have been especially entrepreneurial in ensuring that they maintain and augment the 30% of luxury business they already make in the Gulf. They consistently pursue marketing strategies and cultivate business opportunities in Muslim-majority countries to sell haute couture scarves, suits, more modest versions of their catwalk styles, and makeup to rich Muslim women. This is of course ironic because France is also the country that recently banned both the hijab and the niqab in public school and public spaces on its own soil. The hijab and niqab may be challenges to French secularism, as French policymakers like to repeat, but they certainly also represent an economic boom that they are also keen to preserve. The growing appeal of Islamic fashion among Muslim women of all ages around the world may be partly due to the fact that these clothes challenge conservative Islamist views of appropriate Muslim women's dress and the strict governmental regulations imposed on women's attire in some Muslim-majority societies. In many ways, Islamic fashion can be thought of as a revolutionary type of fashion, one that claims to endorse women's individuality and protect their human right to choose. Iranian haute couture designers confirm this view, regularly pointing out that their bold use of color is primarily intended as their mode of resistance to clothing regulation and color limitations imposed on Iranian women after the Islamic Revolution. Another expression of resistance to veiling in Iran is known as bad hijab. That is the adoption of a short overcoat and tighter-fitting attires and a looser headscarf instead of the traditional and governmental mandated chador. Such bad hijab is regularly and oftentimes severely reprimanded by the Iranian morality police, as we see in this slide. Contrary to what many may believe, therefore, some Muslim women resort to Islamic fashion as a strategy to own what is considered in many societies a religious or political mandate to veil. By adopting fashionable or bad hijab, some Muslim women are staging their own revolution, at once following and subverting the sartorial rules of their community. Islamic fashion, and despite its commercial implications, is also, and at times, a voice of resistance to univocal, essentialist, and conservative interpretation of Islamic veiling. That fashion is not the only way that Muslim women are asserting themselves and proclaiming their individuality today. Many are also regularly sustaining their hairdo, hair highlights, and various hair treatments, even while fully covering their hair in public. And this is the second part of my presentation, the soaring development of hair and beauty salons catering specifically to the needs of veiled women. And I'm calling that haute coiffure. While a growing number of hair salons catering only to women wearing the hijab and niqab are sprouting around the world, others are adapting their existing business, which had long been serving non-veiled women. My own hairdresser in Egypt falls in this latter category. Seeing a drop in his business because an increasing number of women had started to veil, he decided to modify his salon to suit his changed clientele. He taught his wife to cut and style women's hair so that he could be in charge of the veiled women's only section of the business. But this is not all. When veiled women enter his salon, they do not just enter a women's only space. They must cross the front section where my male hairdresser still works in order to reach the back room reserved for hijab and niqab women. So a delicate dance always takes place during which he discreetly averts his eyes or pretends to be occupied with some other important pressing matter, while hijab and niqab women hurriedly head to the back room partitioned off by a thick black curtain. Some hijab and niqab women continue to allow the male hairdresser to style their hair, even though this contravenes the strict rules of hijab, which dictate that a woman not show her hair to a man who is not a close relative. These women, invoking the hairdresser's unmatched skills, maintain that he knew them during their pre-hijab life, and hence he does not strictly count as an unrelated male. While such arguments are questionable from a strict religious perspective, they reveal that being stylish and maintaining a perfect hairdo are top priorities for women who wear the hijab or the niqab. It is not because they do not show their hair or face in public that they neglect their hairstyle or hair color. For that, some flexibility in the interpretation of hijab and some negotiations must be allowed. To conservative Muslims, websites and critics who decry the growing vogue of Islamic fashion, trendy Muslim women respond by invoking the modesty of the soul, rather than secular modesty. Many cite a well-known hadith that states, God is beautiful and He loves beauty. For fashionable and devout Muslim women alike, veiling is intended to radiate God's magnificence through attention to one's own human beauty. In other words, for some, hijab fashion is adopted as an outward expression of a Muslim woman's spiritual beauty, and by extension, as a symbol of God's glory. The focus on spiritual beauty has become today the main alternative discourse that the Islamic fashion industry has deployed to deflect criticism. This argument is compelling since it allows virtue to coexist with the active quest for beauty. It validates women and designers who are working hard to achieve and align inner and outer beauty. And by referencing a well-known hadith, they are able to challenge their critics on their own terms. Ironically, it is precisely this interest in spiritual beauty that has led to the recent developments of Islamic beauty pageants held in some Muslim-majority societies. And this is the third aspect of my presentation today. These Islamic beauty pageants remain little known by most Muslims and non-Muslims. They differ from Euro-American pageants in that their focus is not to identify the most physically beautiful girl, but to recognize the girl with the most beautiful Islamic soul, with the most praiseworthy Islamic morals. In an interview reported in the Huffington Post on June 6, 2009, Khadra al-Mubarak, founder of the first Islamic beauty pageant in Saudi Arabia, an event which has received much media coverage, explains that the primary goal of the pageant is indeed, and I quote, to measure the contestants' commitment to Islamic morals. It's an alternative to the calls for decadence in the other beauty contests that only take into account a woman's body and looks, end quote. The Saudi beauty pageant claims, therefore, not to be interested in outer beauty, but to reward instead Muslim women's inner beauty. This inner beauty is defined specifically in this context as the devotion and respect that the contestant shows her mother. No men are involved in the contest, and the judge's role is to select the girl who will be crowned Miss Beautiful Morals. The contest has been so well received that participation has more than doubled since the pageant was created in 2008, from 75 to more than 200 girls between the ages of 15 and 25. And I'd like to show you a little briefly. I don't know how you do this. Okay. A little bit of the beauty pageant, just to give you a sense of how it works.
لم يعد الجمال الأنثوي معيارا يعتمد على المظهر فحسب، واستبدل ذلك بالأخلاق والسلوك كمقياس جديد في أول مسابقة من نوعها لملكات جمال الأخلاق في السعودية. المسابقة نظمها مهرجان الصفا النسائي، وشهدت منافسة بين عدد من الفتيات للفوز باللقب.
من خلال اتصالاتنا المباشرة مع الفتيات لوحظ أن الفتاة بشكل عام منجرفة نحو مفاهيم مغلوطة عبر ما تبث بعض الفضائيات من أفكار غربية تخلو من أي هدف. أيضاً الفتاة منشغلة بالمظهر الخارجي، وفقط من هنا جت فكرة خلق البديل، فجت فكرة مسابقة ملكة جمال الأخلاق تهدف بالمرتبة الأولى إلى بث الفضيلة وإن كانت بأساليب مختلفة. نركز على قيمة بر الوالدين في هذه المسابقة.
الجميع كان مثل الأخوات في الأسرة واحدة. جميل جدا، كانت بنتنا داخليا وخارجيا في المسابقة مهارات سواء خارجيا في الديكور والعناية بالبشرة أو داخليا مثل فنون التواصل وتطوير الذات. دخلت مبار المسابقة والدورة وكانت دورة جدا جدا جميلة، حيث أنها صقلت أشياء واجد في شخصيتي خارجيا وداخليا. كنت أصغر في المتسابقات ويعني يكفي حتى لما طلعت فزت في هذه المسابقة يكفي إني اجتزت المراحل كلها وصلت آخر مرحلة.
العديد من المهارات الاجتماعية وفنون التعامل اكتسبتها المشاركات قبل عمليات الفرز والإعلان عن المتوجة باللقب. متسابقات خسرن المنافسة لم يخرجن خاليات الوفاق في مسابقة وصفت بأن المشاركة فيها رابع.
So, of course, we're not used to thinking about beauty contests in those terms, so I'd be very curious to hear your thoughts in the discussion about that. I'm not used to a Mac. My PC works much better. Really, I can sometimes see this. Okay. While women who compete in the Saudi beauty pageant all wear abayas and cover their face in observance of local traditions, this is not the case in all beauty pageants. Lebanon, for instance, lies at the other end of the spectrum and features non-hijab wearing contestants and women participating in swimwear competition, just like beauty contests in Euro-American societies. In Egypt, on the other hand, which hosted the first Miss Arab World Beauty Contest in 2009, both veiled and unveiled women are invited to participate, and the winner of that contest was a veiled Saudi woman, Mawad Amin. Despite the vast differences between Euro-American and Islamic beauty contests, the very existence of Islamic beauty competitions are worth noting, as they reveal the efforts made by some Muslims to participate in some established Euro-American traditions. In Muslim-majority societies, these new pageants are as controversial as they are in Euro-American societies. They are at times heralded as a positive sign of Islamic feminism, of modernity and progress. At other times, however, such pageants are derided for being a facile imitation of and surrender to Euro-American popular culture, a capitulation to materialism, and a self-imposed disengagement from Islamic core values. The fourth aspect of contemporary veiling practices that I would like to bring up today is the development of a new type of Islamic fashion industry catering to Muslim children. Just like adult Muslim women consumers of Islamic fashion, Muslim children are learning early on that they too can and should dress and act fashionably, all the while embracing modesty as defined by their family and community. As all savvy business entrepreneurs know, children are prime potential clients, wants to be enticed and educated today so that they may become the avid consumers of tomorrow. The introduction of Muslim children to the Islamic fashion industry begins with play, role play with Muslim dolls. In fact, Muslim dolls have become a multi-million-dollar industry whose designers claim to have an educational objective, namely to teach children what it means to be good Muslims, how to preserve their culture and religion, all the while being fully integrated within their community. While the development of the Muslim doll industry started in the US in the 1990s after the Saudi ban of Barbie, the growth of a fashionable line of clothing for each of the various Muslim dolls is a much more recent phenomenon. When the first Muslim doll, Razan, was created in the US in 1996, for example, she came with 2 outfits only. A set of indoor apparel, which was fashionable and in line with what any non-Muslim girl would be wearing at the time, and an outdoor attire consisting of a long overcoat and a headscarf. Today, Razan has been given not only a series of identities, including a Muslim Girl Scout, a teacher Razan, a student Razan, a praying Razan, but also 3 ethnic variations for each identity: Caucasian, Pakistani Indian, and Black. Moreover, each ethnic variation comes with its own set of fashionable and colorful clothes. Similarly, the most successful Muslim doll, the Syrian Fulla, has witnessed an even bigger boom in her line of fashionable clothing, accessories, and lifestyle items since she was introduced in 2003. Like other Muslim dolls, Fulla had at first only 2 sets of distinct clothing, one for the outdoors and the other for the indoors. For the outdoors, she wears an all-encompassing overcoat or abaya and a scarf. While these were both black in the first edition of the doll, newer collections soon emerged offering different color abayas and matching scarves and accessories. Moreover, Fulla, as a budding consumer of Islamic fashion, has been given a growing line of fashionable indoor clothing which is updated with the seasons and fashion cycles. She has clothes that are appropriate for various activities, including prayer, sports, or role play as a teacher or doctor. Any attire that reveals some skin is clearly labeled on the box as indoor fashion, clarifying the manufacturer's allegiance to Islamic sartorial roots and in an effort to placate any conservative parents' concerns about the morality of the doll. A whole range of accessories are now available for Fulla, reminiscent of Barbie or Disney lines of products, and coveted by young Muslim girls around the world. They extend beyond all sorts of indoor and outdoor clothing, matching handbags and jewelry, which were the original focus of the company, to religiously non-specific accessories such as a sewing machine, a pink Fulla bicycle, cell phone cases, a Fulla CD player, beach toys, tennis rackets, etc. Interestingly, there is no Fulla bikini, although there is a Fulla swimming mask and a snorkel set. Evidently, anything that has a Fulla logo on it is deemed fashionable and sells. In fact, it is guaranteed to become an instant success. And perhaps because it is associated with the brand name Fulla, it is also assumed to somehow inculcate Islamic values and be suitable for Muslim girls. Despite the proliferation of fashion accessories, producers of Muslim dolls insist that fashion is secondary to their main intent, which is to uphold traditional family and religious values. The Fulla webpage states clearly that, and I quote, "Fulla is the little girl that wears modest outfits. Her top priorities are respect for herself and all around her, and being kind to her friends and peers. We take pride promoting virtues to help girls be the very best today, so they will grow up to be the women who make a difference tomorrow." The growing list of Fulla's fashionable clothing and accessories has not deterred many conservative Muslim mothers, those wearing both hijab and niqab. A vast majority remains loyal consumers of the dolls for their daughters, confirming through their purchases the words of a manager of Damascus leading toy store, and I quote, "Fulla is one of us, but Barbie is still a stranger." And also, Fulla is my sister, my wife, my mother. She comes from the same culture. The other thing for me as a parent is about what I want for my child. Barbie has a boyfriend and a bikini and so on, which is not our style in the Middle East. So needless to say, Fulla does not have a boyfriend. I would like now to turn to the final part of my presentation, which is on the voices of Muslim women artists, so such as what we saw today. They are not Muslim women, but they are artists speaking for Muslim women, who are working to transform Muslims and non-Muslims' views of veiling. And they're doing so through poetry, spoken word, stand-up comedy, storytelling, painting, photography, and music, and tonight dance. These artists are using the veil as a forum to challenge the homogenization of Muslim women and to contest the view prevalent by many that veiled women are oppressed, silent, and that they lack subjectivity and agency. They are refusing to have their experiences dictated by others, their stories told by someone who does not know what it's like to be Muslim, a woman, or a veiled woman in the world. As they voice their double struggle against common Euro-American stereotypes on the one hand, and against conservative Islamist discourses on the other, these artists help combat intolerance and invite us to consider veiled Muslim women from new perspectives and to be open to new artistic expressions. Because of time limitations, I will give examples here only of artistic expressions that resort to humor as a way of humanizing Muslim women. And here I have some cartoons, some in French, some in English that you can enjoy while I'm reading. I'm using humor in order to challenge the false, though widespread notion that Muslims don't understand or lack humor, as was claimed during the 2005 Danish cartoons, or more recently, during the violence following the Charlie Hebdo attacks. I really believe that humor, laughing with, not at, including others in laughter, not excluding them, can open up opportunities to discuss together sensitive topics and ultimately build bridges of understanding and solidarity. The first set of examples that I will give comes from an illustrated book now translated into several European languages entitled Burqa. In it, an Italian artist, Simona Bassano di Tufilo, draws 24 illustrations to accompany a short piece written by Jamila Mujahid, an Afghani journalist. The text describes Mujahid's experience as a woman both before and after the takeover of Afghanistan by the Taliban. The story tells of her difficulties at the news that she had to stop work and wear a burqa, her challenges learning to wear it and walk around covered from head to toe, and the violence against women perpetuated by the Taliban that she witnessed on the streets. Some of the cartoons in the book may offend some and shock others. Their goal is to voice the anxiety that some Muslims and non-Muslims may feel around women whose head and entire bodies are covered, and to initiate a conversation about this sensitive topic. And I just would like to show some of the cartoons in that book. So in one of them, and I chose, of course, my favorite, right? So in one of the illustrations, a small terrorized boy searches for his mother in a room full of women all dressed alike screaming, "Mommy." In another, two women in burqa speak to each other. One of them tells the other, "You look great." And in a third one woman in burqa says to the other, "Sorry to be late, I did not know what to wear." Other illustrations focus on men's hypocrisy when they may be forcing women to wear the burqa on the one hand and then taking advantage of women's anonymity to flirt with them with impunity. So this is my favorite. Two men attend an event full of women in burqas. They look around with concern and say, "You never know if your wife is watching you." Like the cartoons featuring women in burqa, these cartoons humanize also men who act in recognizable ways, whether in Muslim majority societies or in Muslim minority ones. My second example comes from stand-up comedy. And I would like to share with you a brief segment of a show by British-Pakistani comedian Sahar Mirza, who has been called the new face of Islam. As you will see, Sahar Mirza has deliberately chosen to perform in visually conservative clothing in order to challenge common stereotypes and unfounded claims about Muslim women. Through her appearance, she hopes to shock her audience and creates dissonance in their minds between the clothes they see and the jokes they hear. Now again, this fantastic machine. So again, just 1 minute.
But you know, sometimes people ask me really silly questions, you know. They say to me, "Why does your mother walk 5 steps behind your father?" And I say, you know, well, he looks better from behind. But actually, these days, the women are walking 5 steps in front of the husbands because of the landmines. Now, but the thing is that I'm very lucky because in England, the women in my family, they're all Muslim and they all wear the burqa, and it's great because they all use the same passport. In fact, we saved a lot of money, and my brothers have started to use my mother's pass now as well. But
Google her, and you'll laugh a lot. Okay, the last artistic voice that I would like to share with you today is part of a new stand-up comedy show created in 2006 called The Hijabi Monologues, a Muslim rendition of Eve Ensler's Vagina Monologues. According to Sahar Amer, one of the co-founders of this initiative, the goal of these monologues is to take the most obvious and public aspect of a hijabi woman's identity and use it to let the whole woman have a voice. The monologue that I will play for you now was performed in New York in 2011 by Linda Sarsour, a Palestinian-American activist, director of the Arab American Association of New York, and named in 2014 a champion of change by the Obama administration.
Do you know what it's like to represent the million human beings every day you walk out of your house? To be looked at as a representative of an entire world religion, a world religion. Do you know what that's like? It's exhausting. And it feels so heavy. Sometimes it makes me angry. And I'm tired. I'm tired when I'm crossing some unknown rule of gender interaction to prevent folks from having to feel they are saying, see, those religious girls, the freaks. I'm tired of not going to class because I didn't do my assignment. And if I can say something incredibly brilliant, my silence will be attributed to being inherently oppressed by my religion. Men, clothing, right on the fact that I didn't do my homework because I was screwing around on Facebook the previous night, like 90% of my class. I'm tired of carefully picking outfits, colors, accessories, toys, every day for public relations purposes, to ensure that I look approachable, yet modest, rather than withdrawn and oppressed. When really some days, let me tell you, it's so so much easier for me to throw on my linen shawl and black abaya over my pajamas. I'm tired of putting on my patient understanding face every time some idiot asks me, what do you all speak over there? And why do people hate us? And is Islam the West at war? Instead of saying hello. Do you not see me? Do you not happen to see that I'm standing right here in front of you and I'm not wielding a sword? I'm tired of wanting to curse the dough when some guy cuts me off on the highway and laughs through his window, or ask my friends while waiting for ice cream, where y'all from? And after my friend responds Brooklyn, he says, listen, don't fuck with me. When I ask you where you're from, don't fucking tell me Brooklyn. You tell me where you're from. I don't respond because I'm scared. It's everyone is watching. I don't want people to think, there goes another angry Muslim, can't control their temper, so emotional. Because it's not like that at all. I'm not another angry Muslim. I'm not a bad example. Hell, I'm not a good example. I'm just not representation. I am a human being, and my name is Linda. But when I do break and say, you know what? Fuck you. What the fuck is your problem, asshole? Where the fuck are you from? It has nothing to do with my religion.
Sorry about this profanity. I know that's not the kind of words we use around here. In conclusion, we can say that the development of Muslim fashion, the establishment of hair and beauty salons for Muslim women who wear the hijab and niqab, the launching of Muslim beauty pageants to crown Miss Beautiful morals, the growth of a whole new line of Muslim dolls and accessories, and the proliferation of artistic forms that challenge conventional views of Muslim women, all show the extent to which the practice of veiling in Islam is not solely associated with religious convictions or political impositions. Veiling is not a practice tied exclusively to religion or politics, but it has become intertwined with global market forces and worldwide economies. The infinite reasons why Muslim women veil beseech us to recognize the fact that personal choice plays a greater role than we might have anticipated in any woman's decision to adopt a particular type of clothing. But the notion of choice must itself be qualified and contextualized. Choice is often associated with a Western style of individualism that stems from the tradition of political liberalism. But choice is not universally just about individual desires. Choice also needs to be understood with cross-cultural sensitivity, because in some societies it can imply allegiance to a larger community. In communities that emphasize group allegiance over individualism, and this is the case of many Muslim-majority societies, choice is not always about doing what one wants independently of the group, but it may also be about adopting what is best for the group. Wishing to affiliate oneself with one's community through veiling does not need to mean that veiling practice is a coercive imposition or a sign of fanaticism, but rather it may be a well-considered, voluntarily chosen act of piety, ethics, or political assertion. Understanding veiling practices means recognizing the fact that it is impossible to know the depth of a Muslim woman's piety or fanaticism, the extent of her feminism or conservatism, the degree of her liberation or oppression based on clothing alone. There is no generic veiled Muslim woman. And I would like to end my presentation with the words of feminist scholar Amina Wadud, a progressive Muslim who was with us here yesterday, who has recently pointed out the hijab of coercion and the hijab of choice look the same. The hijab of oppression and the hijab of liberation look the same. The hijab of deception and the hijab of integrity look the same. You can no more tell the extent of a Muslim woman's sense of personal bodily integrity or piety from 45 inches of cloth than you can spot a fly on the wall at 2,000 feet. Thank you.
So there's a microphone here available for questions, and I think I can carry it around. You have to wait.
That was great talk, thank you. I'm just curious what inspired you to begin this research and take it on?
Why I decided to do this research?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, thank you for that question.
Can you use the mic, please?
Yes? Is this better?
Yes.
Okay. Why I decided to do this research. I started doing this research well before 9/11. So it wasn't 9/11 that brought me to do this research. I did it for many reasons. Perhaps one of them was because I was surrounded by many people who always asked questions about why do Muslim women veil, and because I'm a Muslim woman, I felt, the need to learn more about it so that I can explain to people why Muslim women veil. I also am a Muslim woman who grew up in France when I was young, and then in the US. And so I have always seen the misunderstandings around me about Islam and Muslim women. So it's also been like some personal experiences that led me to this research. And also, a third important reason is that I myself wore the hijab for a year when I was in my early 20s. I wore the hijab for a year when I was an undergraduate in the US. I was studying at Bryn Mawr College. And I was part of that generation of the early 1980s that went back to veiling from about the 1920s to the 1980s. Most women in Muslim majority societies did not wear the veil. There was like a whole history of unveiling and of feminism and of secularism, and there's a lot to be said about that. But then in the 1980s, there was a return to veiling, and I was part of that generation. In which our mothers, so my mother did not wear a hijab at the time, but the children did. And then so I wore it while I was on a summer break in Egypt, and I came back to Bryn Mawr, and then I was the only one wearing the veil there, and it was a very overwhelming experience. So in contrast to a feeling of community, of spirituality, of support that I was getting in Egypt, I was alone there, and I had no support system whatsoever in terms of veiling. And then the discussions were always about why I was wearing hijab. So like for an entire year, the only conversation I was having with anybody was why was I covering my hair? And it became extraordinarily difficult, exactly like Linda Sarsour. I completely identify with what she said. You become representation, you become just the veiled Muslim woman, and there's nothing else about you that matters. And it became just overwhelming, and I decided to take it off.
Who is it that you find has a problem with veiling?
I'm sorry, who do I find
Who has a problem with veiling?
who has a problem with veiling? That's an excellent question. Who do you think has a problem with veiling? I'd like to return the question to you, to the audience. Do you think anybody has a problem with veiling in the West? Is there misunderstanding about veiling? Or do you think people see veiled women and they think everything is okay? You are nodding. You want to say
Yeah, I
something?
would say that the vast majority of the people in this country have a problem with veiling, just from what I've observed.
Yeah, and what kind of problems do they have?
I mean, I personally just think it's ignorance and a lack of understanding, but I hear people try to use, I hear people try to use the excuse of concerns over security a lot. Like, oh, we can't see their hair, we can't see parts of their body. What types of security issues arise, which I find is a very weak argument, but that's the one that I hear the most. So.
Absolutely. National security is one of the ones that is most often invoked. It's not the only one, but that's what you see if you go to the airport. The racial profiling, which, sometimes you wonder whether it's racial profiling or not. And of course, the argument is not, but it is. Anyway, so the question of you don't see who is underneath it, so definitely, and that's the reason that has been invoked in Europe, in France, that led to the banning of the hijab and the niqab, the law that is spreading across Europe, the law that is debated in the US. There are many cases of discrimination against women who veil that we hear about sometimes very clearly in the media, and I spoke about some of the cases, earlier, the controversies, and then the other question oftentimes that is raised, the other reason for of misunderstanding against, towards women who wear the veil, is the question of feminism, which is the simple way of putting it would be is like, we need to help women shed their veil because we want to liberate them, that they're oppressed. Someone is forcing them to wear the veil. Someone is coercing them, their father, their brother, their government, some other male, somebody else is always forcing women to wear the veil. And yeah, in some cases, absolutely, somebody is forcing some women to wear the veil. But that, I would say, is the vast minority of Muslim women around the world. And
but
so
I
it's
still
also
have a question. Who is it? I don't know any African American women who are asking veiled women why are they wearing a veil.
I'm afraid I don't understand, so can you repeat it slower, perhaps?
Yeah.
I'm saying, you're saying that some people have an issue with women, and some women ask veiled women, why do you wear the veil? But I still am curious about who do you think, who is it that has the problem with the veil? I know a lot of African American women who wear the veil. I don't know any African American women who ask veiled women, why do you veil? They understand it's because for religious and modesty reasons. So who do you think?
Well, I think that there are many different people have a problem. I guess that's my answer. It depends. The politicians have a problem, and having a problem is really a vague way of putting it. They're much ignorance about what it is, and then ignorance breeds fear, and so there is fear. And so, who it is? Many different people. Yeah.
Would you say when a woman stops veiling that she isn't maybe oppressed by society, but oppressed by her family or by people around her?
When a woman stops wearing the veil, she is oppressed by
Her family, or she
because she took off her veil. I think that there are just so many, there's a huge heterogeneity of circumstances and of families, and there are some families who would be very upset if their daughter stops wearing the veil, absolutely. But then there are some families who might be relieved that their daughter stops wearing the veil because of protection, because maybe they feel like she would be hurt or discriminated against or harassed in some circumstances if she was wearing the veil. So I think that it can go either way. It depends on the family, right?
I've thought about this a lot in the last few years. I'm part of a community of artists who argue about this issue. And when I finally realized that the covered head seems, I'm completely comfortable with it. The covered face, I'm extremely uncomfortable with. And I realized that if I transferred this to men with covered faces would terrify me. Women with covered faces, I'm assuming they are women, because, I don't really know. I'm simply uncomfortable with. I feel as if I am personally somehow almost at risk in trying to relate to someone whose face I cannot see. And I just wonder if there are other people who make that distinction or have those feelings.
Absolutely, absolutely. I mean, I think that that's a very common, and I'm sure that maybe a lot of you share that perspective that has just been voiced. I shared it for many, many years, so I mean, I can't say that, you know, I'm unfamiliar with that thought. I think many Muslims completely share that same perspective, and I think that, you know, in many ways the burqa cartoons that I showed express that. I mean, many people, Muslim and non-Muslim, feel absolutely that way. But I also have to say that I've also spent a lot of time thinking about why I'm so uncomfortable, and in some cases, it's just I'm uncomfortable, okay? We just don't go anywhere any further than that, that's it at the end of the conversation. But when you see, for example, on TV, there has been many different a lot of coverage about the Arab Spring, and this is when I really got, you know, started to change my perspective a little bit. Is that in the Arab Spring, there was a lot of times when the reporters were like interviewing people on the streets, and a lot of the people they were interviewing on the streets were, you know, demonstrating and demanding political rights and democracy and all of and freedom of expression, were women whose face was covered. And I mean, I must say that I myself, when I first saw that, I was like, oh my God. Wow, that's amazing. I mean, I was impressed. I was just totally impressed to see women represented in this way who covered their face. And this is when I started to ask myself, I can't make the generalized, I can't have this generalized fear. I can't have this generalized emotion all the time. So I completely understand that in some cases, and I understand where we're coming from, but I am just trying to, I guess, see whether there is a place where we can start to have a conversation with other women, even the women who are covering their face. We feel they don't want to talk to us, but how often have we actually tried talking to them ourselves? You know, probably never. You know, so I'm wondering to what extent this is also something that we just need to initiate discussions and conversation about, instead of saying, I'm scared, and so I'm not going to talk to this woman, and I'm just going to turn the other way. I think that there is perhaps a conversation to be had there too. But I understand, and a lot of Muslims are having the same problems, and there has been many cases of men adopting the burqa to be able to escape, you know, whatever police. And so absolutely, there are these horrible situations. But there are also some women who are wearing the burqa, who have a voice and who are free and who are choosing it, who are not scary, and who you probably will be in agreement with on many more issues than you think. So, thank you.
I want to add also that the dancers, I believe, are also happy to answer questions if you have questions about that.
First, thank you for a wonderful presentation and an absolutely beautiful dance performance, too. I'm interested whether there are different reasons why women wear the veil that are dependent on the cultures they live in and the different political and historical times. If you could give us some examples. And then perhaps a follow-up for Christine or one of your co-dancers. Friends, the last image was just really striking, and just listening to the last talk I would be curious to see if that was a staged image or a photo of a woman, I guess, who was getting married and was wearing some kind of a medal. I don't know, certainly something that left me very confused.
There is a tale about that. Sure.
So do you want me to say maybe a little bit about why women wear the hijab? So there are many, probably as many reasons as there are women. So it's hard to like say many, I mean all of them, but I can give a few examples. So of course we have to start with women who wear the hijab for religious, pious reasons. There are some women who very strongly believe that there is an Islamic injunction to a mandate to be modest. And modesty has been traditionally understood in this region of the world as covering your body and your hair. And for some, and in some regions, the face. Okay? But there's also debate about whether there is really a religious injunction or is this the interpretation of the injunction over time that has led to this particular interpretation. So even the religious reason is itself under a lot of debate among various groups of Muslims. So there is that, and of course there is a political reason. So I mean, I refuse to talk about both of these reasons, but they do exist. I mean, these are of course important reasons. But the political, if we think about where in the world a government requires women to veil, there are only 4 countries in the world. That's it. Of all the Muslim majority society, there are 4 countries in the world. We have Saudi Arabia, Iran, the Sudan, and the Aceh province in Indonesia. And that's it. I mean, all of the other countries, of the Muslim majority countries, women have the choice to wear or not wear. Okay? So it's a very small minority. The choice, what are the reasons? Some women are wearing the veil because they feel it liberates them. In one way, does it liberate them? In multiple ways. In many Muslim majority societies, Muslim women have started coming in the workforce, in the public sphere, alongside men in positions that were previously occupied by men relatively recently, only maybe since the 1960s and the 1970s. And so at that time, a lot of women had never worked alongside men. So their families and themselves felt that in order to increase their possibility of employment, they needed to keep as modest as possible. So veiling actually was what allowed them to go out of the home and work outside and become financially independent. So feminism in that sense, in the sense of work, of going out, of being independent, of supporting a family. Okay? There are also women who wear the veil because for feminism, their feminism is interpreted as they're against the commodification of women's bodies and the exploitation of the commercials and media and TV and advertisement of women's bodies, so they want to cover it as a voice of dissent. Some women are wearing it for revolutionary reasons. They are against the stereotypes that are oftentimes prevalent in Muslim minority societies. So for them, wearing the veil is a way of resisting those Western stereotypes and challenging those very Orientalist perspectives of faith. So there are just many different reasons, and they change over time, and they change in different societies. And then there's the fashion. It's the fashion. All your friends are starting to dress in that same way. The colors are getting more and more beautiful, and so it makes them feel that they're part of the community. So many different reasons. Thank you. Perhaps we can hear now from the dancers.
Yes, and now that you've spoken, I from more than a question. It was about the last image. Yes. Okay, so the last image, I think for me has to do with the idea that we veil in many ways, whether it's Islamic veil or something else, and we cover up, and as we do cover up, we reveal ourselves. And this last image came from a creative game I played with a friend, in which we pick various items and we put them on a little bit fast, to see what comes out, what aspect of ourselves we want to uncover when we cover ourselves with stuff like that. So it's actually a way of playing with the veiling as a revealing tool, whether it's the traditional veil or not. Yeah? And then the idea that we weave the cloth of our veils, of our faces. So yes, maybe she's getting married. Maybe she likes to have
Who knows? Other questions?
Do you know about the origin of the veil? How long it's been associated with?
Yeah. Okay, so a lot of people, especially because of the discussions around veiling, it's often associated with Islam, even though, as the performance, for example, showed us, there are many different other cultures and religious traditions that also have, that wear the hijab. So the Virgin Mary, for example, is always shown covering her hair, the communions, the nuns, Jewish women wear hijab, etc. The earliest reference to veiling actually comes from the 13th century before the Common Era in a legal text among the Assyrians, so the region in Iraq, Syria today, that was defining who was allowed to veil and who was not allowed to veil. Veiling was a social custom to mark aristocratic women and freeborn women, and to distinguish them from slaves. So slaves were not allowed to veil, in contrast to aristocratic, freeborn, married women. And that book then described the punishment that, let's say, slaves would have if they, contravened these social customs. So veiling was a social custom before it became associated with a religious custom. And this was happening in the region where Judaism and then Christianity and later Islam came about. And so they basically inherited those very same traditions, social customs that were in place already in that same region. And so Islam is just basically the latest inheritor of this custom. And for a very long time, veiling was actually more of a social custom rather than a religious tradition. And for example, if we think about in Egypt, the beginning of the feminist movement in the 1920s, when the first women started taking off their hijab, actually it was the niqab, it was the face veil, it was mostly the aristocratic women who were taking them off, because women were working in villages or living in villages or in the rural areas. First of all, they didn't come into contact with many foreign people, so they weren't covering up. They were working in the field. I mean, it was not a convenient thing to do, to be working in the field covered from head to toe. So they weren't covered. It's the people in the urban areas, the aristocratic women, to mark their social status, that they belonged to a rich enough family who could keep them away from working. So that's why they were covered if they went on the streets. And so when they took off their veil, interestingly, it's the villages, that the women from the villages who took it on, who rushed to take it on as a sign of possible social promotion, climbing the social ladder. Because this also corresponded to the time of migration from the rural areas to the cities. So they saw that as a way of becoming in the middle class from the villages, of becoming sophisticated. And so from the 1920s to the 1970s, if you saw any woman veiled in Muslim majority societies, you immediately knew that she was from the lower class. Because all upper class, educated women wanted to be cosmopolitan, and being cosmopolitan and modern and Western was taking off your hijab. So it's completely different from what we think about.
You had brought up during your presentation that you hope that someone asked the question about the beauty pageants and the difference that there are some that do the one-piece swimsuit, and then there was other contestants that are wearing the whole hijab. And I wanted to know what you're going to say about it. You were hoping someone asked the question.
No, I didn't want to say anything. I wanted to know what you thought.
Oh,
since you brought it up, you tell us what you think.
Okay. Well, I thought that it was just what I saw from the slide. I think that it's a huge possible contradiction between the different women that are the participators. That if they went in and are they viewing themselves as different and maybe not corresponding with each other's religious views or just feminist views, because some are going to get covered during that portion of the pageant, and then others are going in what would be considered revealing to the others, and not, if there was maybe just some contradicting views or even judgment between them, or like how it was viewed from the viewers. And, obviously, a covered woman had won that pageant, as you had mentioned. So why would someone want to go out and expose themselves if they're considered to be Muslim?
They're not the same pageant. Oh, okay. So the Saudi pageant, all the women are covered. The Lebanese pageant, none of the women is covered. Okay. So there are different types of pageants. So I guess my point was to show that there are different types of beauty pageants. Well, first of all, that there are beauty pageants in Muslim majority societies, and then within that you could even have a beauty pageant, even with women who, from a Western perspective, you don't think that there's anything to have a beauty pageant about, since you can't see anything, right? Because we assume that the beauty pageant, you have to have a perfect body that will match the inner beauty, whereas here that we're only thinking about inner beauty. And so this just forces us to rethink beauty pageants. I guess that's the point that I was trying to make.
And I did have just a question about the first few slides. I just mentioned that the head wraps are becoming, the fashion statement was to become more colorful and to be adding the jewelry and accessories on top of them and to incorporate them in the fashion. And you had briefly mentioned that they're the revolutionists that are trying to now be to become more modern, I guess you would say. And so is that very problematic in these countries that are set on the conservative Muslim ways on how a woman should dress?
Again, there are different perspectives. So for some women, they're trying to resist that imposition from government or families or religious views that clothing should be very modest and therefore perhaps dark and not elaborate and everything. And so by adopting these colorful styles and the jewelry, they're contesting it. So literally they're covered. We can't say that they're not covered. But the question is, to what extent does this color, or those jewelry, or those shining stones, really also question or challenge the mandate to be modest? So are we just obeying the letter or the spirit, in other words, of the mandate? And that's a big, huge controversy. I mean, there are just so many different ways to look at it.
I think there was one more question. Maybe you want to say something?
I was wondering about the cultures that require it, whether it be religious or political, at what age that starts? If the little girls require it, or is it more of a
Yeah, typically it would be at puberty that girls are supposed to, and again I put supposed to because that's how the religious mandate is understood. It's at puberty. So of course, 13, 12, 14, I don't know. However, you probably have seen, like I have seen, sometimes you run into families and you see little girls, definitely younger than 13, who are covered. And I always am amazed to see that. And I think that there are some cultures in Africa where they start younger, but I think they start younger, not religious reasons. I mean, it's more custom, cultural reasons, social reasons. And also, I think that a lot of times it's the girls themselves who see their mothers and their aunts and their neighbors wearing those clothes, so for them it's a way of growing up. It's a little bit like, your mother is wearing high heels and you want to wear high heels or something. And so you want to wear it, you want to adopt the same thing. So that could be the case. Or it could also be very conservative families that want to make sure that their kid grows up learning that veiling is the right way to dress. And so they are basically making them practice it since they were young. So I think that you can't really make one, there isn't one reason, there might be different reasons why you see much younger kids wearing it, but it's supposed to be, if you follow, you know, the rules that are established, it is about puberty.
I just had a quick question. I was interested that you said the vast majority of Muslim women wear the veil voluntarily. Are there studies or, I mean, is there some documentation about that? I think it's such an enormous population, if I could actually do a study like that, but I'm curious if there are studies.
I don't think there are statistics, so I don't know if you're meaning statistics
Yes.
about choice. I don't think that there are statistics. However, there are many ethnographic studies and studies that involve a lot of qualitative analysis of interviews in various areas of the world that talk about that. So we definitely, if you start speaking to women, this is where you are going to find that type of information. But it's very hard to even get a sense of, like, let's say, how many women around the world are wearing hijab. I mean, I think that's impossible to get a sense of that. And then there are also a lot of women who wear the hijab not all the time. So do you count them or do you not count them if you were to do such a study? So it's very, I mean, that would be a hard one to do. And then there's some countries, like, for example, in France, where you're not even allowed to ask people's religion. So you probably, and then where you are not allowed to wear the hijab, so you might be wanting to wear the hijab, but you can't wear it. So do you count as voluntarily wearing the hijab, or do you count as not wearing the hijab? So there are many just like logistical problems with, I think, even conducting such a study.
So I think with that, we're going to end this evening, and I'd like to thank again Dr. Amer and also Dr. Professor Productions for everything that they did tonight.